Do you ever find yourself playing the role of caretaker in relationships? Sometimes feeling like you have to control people's lives, even indirectly, just to make sure that they're okay so that then you'll feel okay? Do you find yourself thinking more about other people sometimes than you do actually thinking about your own life, your own feelings, your own needs? And if any of these things sound like you might be struggling with something called codependency. Now, this is a very common experience, especially for fearful avoidant attachment styles. So in this video, I wanted to help you unpack some of the core wounds, basically some of the big fears most associated with codependency, and also other really common beliefs. So we're going to go through 7 common beliefs, and then we're going to talk for point number 8 about a few, like a grouping of a few core wounds that are very much going hand in hand with codependency. Now, if you don't know what codependency is, it's essentially what happens after we get enmeshed. So enmeshment is sort of like you losing the plot of where you end emotionally and someone else begins. And it's very common, and it's not your fault if you are enmeshed, right? It's like usually an adaptation to emotional trauma in childhood. And if you are enmeshed and taking on everybody's feelings around you and really not even being able to stay attuned to yourself, then it's very easy to then behave in codependent ways, which is because you then take on people's feelings. You may feel responsible for their lives. You may feel so much about what they're feeling that you kind of want to have this urge to control their life so that they feel okay, so that then you're not feeling all that uncomfortable emotion from them. And so it can lead to a whole bunch of behaviors that produce codependency. And this can create poor boundaries in our lives. This can create a lot of resentment long term that we may not really realize at the beginning, because we may come, to want to help people or have people lean on us from the best intentions. But it can cause a lot of actual detrimental downsides to relationships long term. So some really common fears most associated with codependency are, number 1, I am a bad person if I see somebody in pain and I'm not there to protect or save them. Okay. Now, I want you to notice the difference in this belief between, if I see somebody in pain, I can show up, I can support them, I can do what I can, but it's not my responsibility. I can't ultimately save it for them. I can't change their situation per se. I can support, I can offer support, and they'll take it or they won't, but I can't control that. And I want you to notice the difference between this, like, I'm a bad person if I'm not fixing things for somebody, versus I can do my best when I see people in pain. But one of the big things in there is it's like from a place of self-consideration. So the example I'll often use here is like, let's say I have a neighbor and the neighbor says, I need to move and I made a mistake and I have to move tomorrow morning and it's an emergency. Can you please help? Can you come over and help me pack tonight until 4 a.m.? Like, obviously it's a silly theoretical situation, but to illustrate it, right? If I'm codependent, might look at that and be like, they're in pain, they need me, I have to drop everything, my life can't matter. And then I'm there till 4 a.m. And then whatever happens with me the next day, I'm just showing up for, and I'm probably suffering as a result. A healthy amount of support for somebody would be, that's a tough situation. I can empathize with them. I see that they're stressed and they probably feel overwhelmed. And what am I actually available to give that feels good for me, that feels truthful and correct for me? And this may look like, you know what? I have a really busy day tomorrow and I've got a lot of responsibility and I can go over there for an hour and a half, but I'm going to need time to properly recharge tonight, do my laundry, make sure everything's in order for tomorrow, because tomorrow's a big day. So an hour and a half is good. In some cases, it may be somebody has 4 small children and a ton of stuff to do the next day. And they may say, hey, I wish I could help you. I'm so sorry. I'll make you a pot of coffee and drop it by, right? Like, we'd all have to assess our individual situations, see what is true for us, and then support according to that. So notice the difference between what's healthy and this secure, almost compulsion that's the result of this underlying belief, okay? Number 2, I am responsible for other people's feelings when they share them with me. Really common codependent belief. And you can see how, like, okay, so if somebody shares feelings with me, they've now made it my responsibility. I have to fix it and drop everything, versus if somebody shares feelings with me, that's nice. They feel like they can share themselves with me, but it doesn't put the onus of responsibility to make their feelings better on me. And I can, again, going back to this big theme, consider myself, see what I'm available for and give, but from a place of truth, from a place of self-support and support of other interdependently, rather than you shared feelings with me, so now I have to drop everything. Okay. So that's codependent belief number 2. Number 3, I have to be perfect and do my best to never hurt anybody in a relationship. Okay. And, the reason this can really drive codependent beliefs or codependent behaviors is because if you're terrified of hurting people, you're walking on eggshells in all your relationships. And this doesn't mean don't be compassionate, don't be loving, don't be respectful, don't be caring, be all of these things, but be that way to yourself as well. And when I'm like, I have to be perfect to all other people in relationships, basically what ends up happening as a result of that line of thinking is you forget about your own existence. It's like, oh, I'm so busy trying to be perfect for what everybody else needs from me and of me, that there's no room for me to be able to take up space in the world. And ultimately that acts as a poison to your relationships. Ultimately, that will breed so much resentment long-term, that will make you feel burnt out. It'll make you feel like you don't matter to other people. It will make you feel small and sad. And, not to, sorry, getting pretty dramatic here, but I've seen a lot of pain come from this way of thinking and behaving in the world. And ultimately it just creates more barriers between people long-term because people resent each other. And that's a huge emotional barrier in relationships. Number 4, other people's problems that I see are mine to solve. And sometimes even an extension of that is they can be internalized as my fault. Like, oh, if my brother's in pain, I don't have a brother, but in theory, right? If my brother's in pain, it's my fault for not being a better sister, for not stopping him from doing the thing that he did that caused the pain, from not, and it's like this idea, when we really look at it, if we're really honest with ourselves, it's this idea that we're like God, right? It's like, I should be the one to stop him. I'm the almighty, I have control over everybody's life. That's not how it works, right? People have their own divine domain for which they make decisions and from which they show up in their lives. And if we think I have to stop them or it's on me, where are you giving yourself that authority from? Like, why are we putting ourselves in that position? And I'm kind of teasing, but it is interesting to think like that we even believe, that we are the one to control other people's lives. And it's an interesting thing to kind of break down conceptually in your mind, because when you see it through that lens, it can kind of free you from it a little bit. So those are some of our first 4. I have a few more, but I also want to let you know if you resonate with some of these things and you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds like me. I have a whole course on reconditioning codependency, and it involves taking these beliefs and actually doing reprogramming work to free yourself from them. It also involves learning to attune to yourself, learning to meet your own needs, learning to communicate, and learning to have boundaries in your life. And it takes you through every part step by step in a very broken down way. That will really create results and a lot of insight and a lot of emotional freedom in your relationships long term, and also a lot more deep connection, because when you're not connecting from how you think you should be behaving all the time, from this place of like fearing all of these things, there's actually room to be yourself and feel known and feel connected to somebody in your truth. And it takes courage to show up and be truthful. It takes courage to show up and be like, this is actually what I need as well. And these are my boundaries. And it's not an easy thing, but with a little bit of work and refinement, it can create massive breakthroughs in relationships. So anyway, so I'll keep moving. And the link, by the way, you can check out the course for free for 7 days. The link is down below. It gives you access to all of our courses. And I do 4 live webinars every single week with all of our students. You can come in, you can ask me questions live, and you can type them in the chat. If you don't want to be on camera, you can literally choose whatever you want to do that feels comfortable. And we have daily community events as well, where you can connect with other community members. They're led by trained coaches and facilitators. And there's lots of cool stuff going on in there from a community basis as well. So you can check that all out. Okay, so number 5, I need love and approval from others in order to be safe in the world. This is a really interesting one. This drives codependency because we often think like, I have to have approval to be safe. Where does this come from? This comes from if in childhood, that's where you develop that belief. When you're a little child, if a caregiver isn't there to take care of you, you inherently know that you are dependent on them, right? You wouldn't survive without them. And so it's very easy to link survival and approval. It's a very common thing that happens. And if you have caregivers who are inconsistent in different ways, if they put a lot of pressure on you to gain their approval, if they do things that make you feel confused in childhood, and not because they're obviously trying to, but just sometimes there's a lot of things that haven't been discussed about best parenting practices over the generations, of course, then it can leave a lot of imprinting and programming at the subconscious level of mind that cause you to feel like I need that approval just to be okay. And the way you'll know if this is you is because when somebody disapproves of you, you'll have this like anxious ruminating feeling. And that's usually telling you you're carrying this belief. Number 6, this is a good one. Guilting and shaming myself keeps me good and thus safe. This can be a really tricky one for people to wrap their minds around at first. Not all people, but a portion of people, because we all grow up in this system of punishment reward where you get punished for doing things wrong, rewarded for doing things right. It's our classical conditioning process of how we're socialized. And so what essentially takes place is that when we have that system bestowed on us or taught to us over and over and over through repetition over a long period of time, repetition and emotion are what create these subconscious programs. So they become your subconscious comfort zone in the relationship to yourself. And I cannot stress enough, I'll make a whole separate video on this now that I'm thinking about it. I cannot stress enough that you don't punish yourself into becoming a better person. We don't punish ourselves into solutions. You grew up in that system, so you may have bought into it and identified with it, but punishment doesn't help you get ahead. Self-punishment, beating yourself up when you make a mistake. And a lot of people are like, but what if I don't punish myself for things, I'll just run amok. I'll just do all this crazy chaotic stuff all the time. It's just not true. It's simply not true. And if you sit with it and question it, you'll see why it's not true. And I'll give you an example. I worked with somebody once who was a client, and they shared that they were angry and that they had a bad day, and this person really struggled with boundaries, and they were at a bank, and they got angry at the bank teller, and they told the bank teller off because the bank teller like made a mistake, or there's an issue. And what happened is this person came into my office that week, and they were like, I can't believe I did this thing. I feel so terrible about myself. I told this bank teller off, and it's because I was stressed and I took out my anger, and I'm such a terrible person, and I'm never going back there again. And, all these things. And what I heard, if I'm honest, right, and I have lived like this, so there's no judgment for me around this. We've all been here until we learn about it, and then we're not, or we don't have to be. But what I heard is this person, and this person was a lovely person, by the way. This wasn't like a bad, evil person. This is like, I don't really believe that people are bad or evil. I think that they're just usually traumatized or less traumatized, right? But with this individual specifically, like they actually had a big, kind heart, really good person, and made a not good mistake, a disrespectful mistake, but made a mistake. And then guess what they did? And look to see if you do this. They went, me. I'm a bad person. I'm all these things. And I said, well, did you go back and correct the mistake? I feel too terrible. I'm too embarrassed. I could never go back there again. So the person makes the mistake. They say the bad thing, and they self-punish. And then we feel so bad. We shrink into this story of ourselves. That doesn't help anyone take accountability. That doesn't help anybody be like, I made a mistake. I'm going to own it. When we're so busy beating ourselves up, we're in the story of ourselves. We're also in the story of the past, how we should have been instead, even if it was direct moment ago past. And that stops you from being like, what was the root cause here? Like, what led me to make that mistake? And in this person's case, when we ask those questions, that this person had terrible boundaries in their life. So they felt pressure from their boss, pressure from their family, pressure from all these people, and they were boiling over with pressure. And so when somebody made a mistake and there was no margin for error in this person's life on an individual level, this person got really angry, and they projected that anger onto this bank teller and said some rude things. Like, how could you make a mistake? You always make mistakes, nothing terrible, but just, not good. And so when we punish ourselves, we think that that's like making us better. But what's actually going to make you better is if you look at the situation, you get curious instead of judgmental towards yourself, you figure out what the root cause was that led up to that problem. And then you proceed to solve for it and to take accountability. So this idea that like number 6, guilting and shaming yourself keeps you good and less safe, that's going to come into all of your relationships. When you guilt and shame yourself excessively for any mistakes you make, it's going to prevent accountability. It's going to prevent growth. We want to have compassion towards ourselves, understand the root problem, and show up to make amends for that root problem. And that is a mature and responsible way of approaching things. I'm going to go through the last ones quickly because I'm realizing this is probably a long video. Number 7, my sense of self is directly connected to others. In other words, you get your sense of identity more from your external relationships and from your internal self, and knowing yourself, being in touch with your feelings, being in touch with your needs, knowing your boundaries, having a mission and vision for your life. And again, this usually comes because if you were in childhood trying to make sure you were connected to others so you could survive, and if this became your patterning, then you learn to get yourself from others rather than taking the time to decide and reflect and introspect about who you are from the inside out, and then show up accordingly. And then our core wounds and fears. And again, I know this is a lot of information, but we have a whole course on this. You can check out for free that breaks this down. There's a workbook. You can go through the exercises. It's all very in-depth and clear. And these core fears that will drive codependent behaviors and codependent relationships are: what if I'm abandoned? What if I'm alone forever? What if I'm unsafe? I'm not worthy of love, so I have to earn it from my relationships. I'm afraid of being unloved, so I'm going to, betray myself to try to please people so that I can get that love. And I am not enough as I am. And all these things will tend to drive codependency long-term. So these are all changeable. You do not have to live this way for the rest of your life. And there's a whole lot of freedom on the other side, and a whole lot of richness and depth to relationships when you actually can show up and share your true self. So anyways, that course will help you get there, discover what that is, all those sorts of things. Let me know if you have questions as well in the comments below. And thank you for watching. And hopefully this gives you some insight and is helpful for you. And if you are getting a lot of value from this channel, I would love if you would become a subscriber and hang out with me here more often. And thank you. And I will see you in the next video.